Okay, before I get into this one, I just want to say I'm coming off of a little bit of a cold, as you can probably hear in my voice. So my voice isn't going to be as velvety smooth as it usually is, so bear with me. However, let's talk about Joshua Buatsi versus Callum Smith. An interesting fight, in my opinion. A fight I've been interested in for a while, actually. I notice it hasn't really been spoken about as much compared to some of the other fights, but I think it's potentially just been a bit overshadowed because this card really is quite stacked. But if we're talking about this one, I actually did a video on this fight a couple of years ago. Can't remember exactly when, but I was just asking the question: is Joshua Buatsi swerving Callum Smith? Because at the time, I believe there was a title eliminator that was called between these two. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm probably misremembering, but it was something along those lines. And the fight didn't go ahead, obviously. And as I say, I was asking the question: is Joshua Buatsi maybe a bit apprehensive to fight Callum Smith? Does he see him as a bit too dangerous? And it came out. So obviously, hindsight's 2020. This was around the time where Joshua Buatsi parted ways with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. And so, in retrospect, I can understand why the fight didn't go ahead because we see it often. Not that I condone it, but I think it is understandable when fighters are having contractual issues, legal issues. They're not in a good place for a fight that's potentially quite dangerous, and I can understand why a fighter would maybe put the big fights on hold just until they resolve whatever situations they're having. So, nevertheless, that's all in the past. The fight is happening. It's almost here, and I still think it's an interesting fight. I'm not as interested. I'm not as intrigued as I was a couple of years ago because, of course, Callum Smith fairly recently, about just over a year ago, lost to Artur Beterbiev. So you have to imagine that he's probably lost a little bit. Although I think stylistically, this fight does have potential for drama. And as I expressed a long time ago in that video now, um, I do see Callum Smith as a dangerous stylistic matchup for Joshua Buatsi. And it's really, Callum Smith, in my opinion, doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. He's a big guy, but he often struggles to use his size. Skill-wise, he's good, he's decent, but not the most advanced technician you've seen. What he really brings is good sharp counter punching and two-handed power. He is a pretty good puncher with both hands and a pretty sharp counter puncher as well. And I think I can understand, like looking at the way Joshua Buatsi fights in a lot of his fights, I can understand how Callum Smith has the potential to use those strengths and not only have success, but maybe even beat Joshua Buatsi and potentially dramatically as well. Because Joshua Buatsi himself, he has a very, I don't want to say unique style, but a very particular style whereby he's not a very defensive fighter. I don't think he has much defensive instinct, and in terms of technique and skill set, I don't think he's got a very, doesn't have really many defensive techniques. He leans quite heavily into his offense and being quite aggressive and physical, and that's really been able to save him in many instances. But I think at the same time, it's also put him in some quite precarious positions whereby he's made fights more difficult for himself because he's so almost adamant to really press the issue and be aggressive. And coupled with that lack of defensive instinct, he's no stranger to getting caught. But he's a tough man physically and mentally, and so he's managed to get through. But I do believe Callum Smith is the type of puncher and the type of counter puncher who can make it so that your heart and your determination, your grit, don't matter all that much because you're separated from your senses. I'm not going to say that this happens in that fight. I just don't have enough confidence. However, it wouldn't surprise me if come Saturday 22nd, Callum Smith wins and wins by stoppage because there is potential there. However, I don't think I can lean into that potential too much. But I think Callum Smith he's failed to really pull it out of the bag in these big fights. We've seen that against Beterbiev and Canelo. To date, I think his best fight really is George Groves, and that was a diminished George Groves. He was a spent force by then. He was injured. Come towards the end of his career, which a very George Groves had a really like tough career, a long, tough struggle, like a real grind. And so by the end, he was done. He was spent. Callum Smith got the business. Yeah, he got the business done. But um, yeah, against Canelo, kind of bottled it. Really was just glued to the ropes the whole time, getting bullied by uh, Ginger Garden Gnome. Beterbiev seems to bully everyone other than Dmitry Bivol for the most part. But yeah, Callum Smith just couldn't make his assets, couldn't make them count. And I think a lot of that comes down to his lack of desire in many instances. Obviously, he only has a certain amount of skill, but the Smith brothers in general, they're very there's something missing. They're a little bit soulless in the sense where they're just so boring. There's no life in them. I've never come across such a dull group of brothers in my life. Obviously, I don't know them personally. I'm just going off of what they present in the boxing sphere. But yeah, there just doesn't seem to be much going on with those guys. Like Callum Smith, his nickname is Mundo. Should be changed to Mundane because this guy is just so dull. Excuse me, and I think that spills over into that boxing style where he just doesn't have that fire sometimes. And I don't think you could afford to have that against Joshua Buatsi, who's very tenacious, very tough, and will keep swinging. He will, even if he's hurt. Although he can be limited, he can be vulnerable himself. I just think I give Callum Smith a puncher's chance, but I think if I'm going to put money on it, if I'm going to bet, I think Joshua Buatsi gets the job done, and I think he probably gets it done inside the distance. I reckon he'll have to break down Callum Smith, really have to lay into him a little bit because Callum Smith can tuck up as well, so it'll probably be difficult to really nail him. So I think this will be a long one. I think if Buatsi's going to get the stoppage, I want to say around round 9, 10. So definitely getting towards the later rounds of the fight. Excuse me. And yeah, I think around 9 or 10 stoppage for Joshua Buatsi. I don't think it'll be clean. I think he'll just probably force a corner stoppage or a referee stoppage, if I'm honest, something along those lines. And I do think it'll be an interesting fight, though. As I say, there is potential there for Callum Smith to get the win, or at least have success, but just can't lean too heavily into potential, although it wouldn't surprise me at all. But hey, that's just my take. I'm going Joshua Buatsi stoppage in 9 or 10 rounds. So leave your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think of this fight? Who you're predicting will win, and how do you think they'll do it? For now, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.